Section 1 of a study in the psychology of religious phenomena. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kurt Walton. A Study in the Psychology of Religious Phenomena by James H. Loeba. From the American Journal of Psychology, Volume 7, Number 3, April 1896, Section 1. Introduction. The passage from the standpoint of knowledge, for knowledge's sake, to that of knowledge for life's sake, expresses one of the aspects of the widest movement of modern intellectual evolution. Our age, and in particular the Anglo-Saxon race, has gained the reputation of being intensely practical. This tendency has a deeper philosophical meaning than is generally recognized. As the child passes with advancing years from actions having no objective end to activities for definite results, in a like manner do nations turn from the delusive grandeur of the knowledge for knowledge's sake ideal to that of knowledge for life's sake, and substitute the gospel of being and of doing for that of knowing. Intellectual pursuits have been powerfully stimulated and their direction much altered by this great life wave. Until the beginning of our century, the formal operations of the mind and the framing of cosmological schemes were the chief objects of philosophical meditation. Schopenhauer, following in the steps of some predecessors and reacting against what we like to call static philosophy, brought us face to face with the unconscious, the emotional, the striving forces of nature. Up to him, philosophy was anatomical. He made it physiological. It is in psychology that we find this practical tendency working the most decisive changes. With the increased interest in the impulsive, the instinctive, the affective side of life in general, a number of new lines of research, all having a close relation to life, have been opened. Child study, the psychology of growth, of adolescence, of sex, some branches of anthropology, psychiatry. And instead of standing aloof from life on barren heights, modern psychology feeds on biology and on physiology, and is the handmaid of pedagogy and of ethics. There remains a domain in which psychological science has not yet planted its standard. It has ignored the manifestation of religious life. Yet there are few questions engrossing so much the attention of our thinking world as that of religion, and there are no spheres in which more powerful creative forces are at work. The fall of Christian orthodoxy is accompanied with a recrudescence of religious fervor. Neo-Christian movements are in progress in France and in Germany, and have long since begun to agitate England and the United States. All over the civilized world, men's hearts and brains are in a travail with a new revelation. It is true that a great deal of historical and philosophical work bearing on the religious problem has been done during the past decades, but no researches from the standpoint of modern psychology on the subjective phenomena of religious life have appeared. Comparative studies of religions, historical accounts of their growth and development, investigations into the content of religious consciousness are valuable contributions to our knowledge. They accomplish for religion what would have been done for medicine before dissection was practiced by historical researches, comparative expositions of the various notions and systems in vogue in different countries, and the like, all of which is very good and useful. But the essential work, the scientific work par excellence, that was to give to medicine a solid foundation, was the actual study of the body by means of scalpel and microscope. If religion has any reality, it must perforce express itself in psychic and physiological phenomena. The work of a true science of religion, as we understand it, is to find out what these subjective manifestations are, and then to treat them as it would any other psychic fact. Neither the theories nor the external practices, rites or ceremonies, but the deeper subjective realities experienced by the individual constitute the material out of which the new revelation will issue. Never mind the old and the new popular beliefs concerning these realities. Never mind the body of doctrines held by the subject of these experiences. Mind the subjective fact in itself. To it science must apply its tools, for it is the essence of religious life. After all, the questions which must be solved are the following: what are the gifts in the hands of religion, and how can man become partaker of them? How and by what in religion is life transformed and ennobled? How is man born again? These are the questions confronting science and philanthropy alike. We would not convey the impression that we hold in contempt the labors of the eminent workers in the field of history and philosophy of religion. We would only direct the attention of those interested in this problem to another line of research, and emphasize our conviction, which, we cannot help thinking, will be shared by all those who have learned the lesson given us by the history of the natural sciences, that its solution will come only from the scientific, psychological study of every one of the particular subjective manifestations of religious life. Supposing that these several phenomena have been singled out, and that, as far as our means permit, they have been determined in their cause and in their nature, we should possess in these theoretical results the elements of a science of religion. The new creed would be born. The wings of youth would no more be clipped in the spring of life by a scholastic dogmatism, and the soul midwifery, now extensively but ignorantly practiced by our revivalists and pastors, could be based upon a positive knowledge of the psychology of regeneration. What a fantastic dream, many will exclaim. It must be admitted that the difficulties in the way of such a task are serious, and that we are as yet far distant from the goal. Nevertheless, that is no utopia, but the sure conquest of a near future, is warranted by the recent advances of psychology. For within do religious phenomena essentially differ from some of those with which that science is now dealing. The religious experience named sense of sin, repentance, remorse, aspirations toward holiness, regeneration, parenthetically conversion, trust, faith, belong to the same class of the affective problems now under study, as, for instance, the question of pain and pleasure, the relation of the feelings to the intellect, the motor power of ideas, attention, effort, etc. If they do not include the whole of religious life, the facts we have mentioned constitute at least the essence of Christian life. For what reason should we pry into the latter and refrain from inquiring into the former? These subjective facts of religious life belong to psychology. It is the duty and the privilege of that science to extend its beneficial scepter over this realm also. The time is particularly favorable for such an annexation. The power that ruled during the past centuries have grown senile. Its authority is denied. A painful anarchy prevails. Let psychology accept the succession that falls to it by right. Led by considerations, some of which are indicated in the preceding pages, while others are to be mentioned in the following section, we have undertaken a study of the phenomena commonly called conversion. We have chosen conversion because of its striking and well delineated characteristics, and on account of its paramount importance in religious life. Moreover, material for the study could be collected without too much difficulty. The reader may feel that our choice has been presumptuous. However that may be, it is with a painful feeling of its incompleteness and insufficiency that we send forth the following essay. Had it no other value, it would at least be an indication of what might be done in this department of psychology. As a number of records of conversions has been appended, we shall dispense with a description of the experience going under that name. We have limited our material to sudden and well-marked cases, for the reason that violent psychic phenomena, by their very emphasis, bring to light what remains obscure in less intense and slower events. In the main, the conclusions reached by the study of sudden conversions apply with equal exactitude to slowly progressing regenerations. End of introduction. The religious motive. We are aware that many will be of the opinion that the subject of our inquiry is an abnormal phenomena, which would not occur in a healthy and enlightened community. They will see in it mere idiosyncrasies extraneous to the main current of life. That such an estimate ignores the true nature of conversion will be made apparent, we hope, by the following rapid glance at the evolution of religious consciousness. Religious philosophers have experienced perplexing difficulties when they have attempted to extract from the various known forms of religion common characteristics which could serve in the making of a definition of religion. Herbert Spencer finds the vital element of religion in the impulse of the human race to seek for first principles. Religions diametrically opposed in their overt dogmas are yet perfectly at one in the tacit conviction that the existence of the world with all it contains and all which surrounds it is a mystery ever pressing for interpretation. On this point, if on no other, there is entire unanimity. That this is the vital element in all religions is further proved by the fact that it is the element which not only survives every change, but grows more distinct the more highly the religion is developed. No definition considering religion as a noetic impulse and making it dependent upon particular conceptions as that of God, of soul, of spirit, of immortality, can possibly be adequate. The essence of religion is a striving towards being, not towards knowing. If Spencer and the many philosophers who think with him were right, religion, purified of superstitions, would be neither more nor less than philosophy and science, and the natural culmination of the various forms of religion could only be, as Auguste Comte affirmed, positive philosophy, following upon metaphysics, itself the child of religion. That which the term religion embraced in early societies was a complex product, made up of all the fundamental needs and aspirations of men. It was an embryo containing potentially several different parts and functions as yet undifferentiated, and consequently going under a common name. Thinkers of the opinion quoted above have followed the development of one limb, of the head, if you please, and ignore whatever else grew out of the embryo. The noetic impulse was one of the elements contained in the primitive conglomerate, to be sure, but not the only one, perhaps not even the chief one. Auguste Comte's three stages correspond truly to the three links in the chain of evolution, but he failed to see that at every link other links branch off. Positive philosophy is the form assumed in our time by one of the germinating elements contained in the primitive plasma known originally as religion, the thirst for knowledge. But something else issued forth from primitive religion, as something essentially different from a propensity to solve the riddle of the universe. It is the other shoot which is today the vital force of that which has inherited the name of religion. In the remainder of this chapter we shall try to point out the nature of that motive power. It is not yet completely differentiated from the philosophical motive. They are still blended together in practice and in theory. However, theologies and philosophies are being rapidly winnowed out by the blind intelligence of growth, and religion will soon have assumed an independent and definite figure clearly separated from the latter. The religion of the savage, roughly described, includes beliefs in spirits, good and bad, endowed with the power of harming and prospering. It finds expression in emotions of fear and of hope, of anger and of goodwill, in rites and ceremonies destined to please the spirits, with the exception of direct returns, or prompted only by a desire for fellowship. Let beliefs in spirit cease, and this form of religion is at an end. When the relation between man and the powers above assume a higher aspect, we rise to the Jewish and Christian religions, for instance. Fear, which plays such a preponderant role in primitive religions, as also in the childhood of the individual, is replaced by love. God is now pictured as a sympathetic father, listening and answering, never angered against his truly repentant children. He stands at the door of the paternal mansion with outstretched arms to receive the prodigal son. If the belief in a beneficent personal divinity watching over the actions of men, able and ready to answer prayers directly, is lost, this form of religion also ceases to exist. Yet religion need not be impaired. History has preserved a famous example of the independence of religious experience from those intellectual concepts. Buddha Sakyamuni was a godless man, and in the narrow meaning given to the term God in Christian theology. He discouraged formal prayer, for it ascended but to strike against the adamantine vault of casual connection and to come back in a mocking echo. Yet we recognize in him a remarkable power and elevated religious nature. What shall we say of the intellectual vanguard of our day? What is the religion of the few bred in the atmosphere of intellectual freedom and scientific thought? whose strong faith in nature boldly discards the ragged garments inherited from the past. Such men, we venture to say, disavow any fear referring to possible action of the divine power. They have no belief in an interfering providence, and consequently none in prayer. Responsibility they feel towards none but themselves and those affected by their doings. Immortality of the ego they possibly cannot even hope for. Adoration, worship, devotion, piety, and the common acceptation are incompatible with these negations. Outwardly they have no cult, return no thanks, and ask for nothing from the powers of the world, for they know them to be deaf to such supplications and insensible to human thankfulness. Narrowly construed, these words have become dead letter to them. Have these men passed beyond the religious stage? Yes, if religion consists in the intellectual beliefs they discard. If we have, in this essay, insisted upon the absolute divorce which must be recognized between intellectual beliefs and religion, it is because in the rupture of this mischievous identification lies one of the most pregnant practical conclusions which modern life can derive from psychological investigations in religious life. The most evanescent aspects of religion are precisely its intellectual formulations, including the idea of the soul, of the future life of God, etc. And the most exalted religious consciousness is consistent with the negative intellectual creed sketched above. These common conceptions, generally regarded as essential, rejected or ignored, the religious sense remains, modified perhaps, but unweakened, in the feeling of unwholeness, of moral imperfection, of sin, to use the technical word, accompanied by the yearning after the peace of unity. No intellectual conviction can rob man of this subjective treasure. Its reality transcends all possible belief concerning the origin and the end of things, because, as we hope to show, it is the psychic correspondent of a physiological growth, and consequently can in no wise fail, except together with that growth. Around this religious root, springing from it, or otherwise functioning related with it, cluster all the familiar religious feelings. For instance, altruistic love is implied in the efforts to attain unity of moral consciousness, for we learn in such experiences that the sacrifice of self gives ease to the pain of sin. The failure of one's efforts to attain moral perfection develops the sense of dependence, of subjection, which has of late been made the center of many definitions of religion. He who has these feelings, which are rooted in the sense of sinfulness, possess the efficient essence of religion. Herbert Spencer's opinion, quoted above, as well as all theories making religion depend upon the desire to know, instead of upon the desire to be, are believed by the biographies of the great founders or promoters of religions. They were not, as we shall presently see, preeminently preoccupied by the riddle of the objective universe. On the contrary, they often ignored almost completely the philosophical problems referred to by the author of the Synthetic Philosophy. Their concern is the attainment of moral perfection, of inward unity. Their speculative interest, as far as it exists, is the result of the activity of the ratiocinating wheels put in motion by the moral needs. The life of Gautama, however lacking in historical certitude, leaves no doubt that what launched him into his religious career was not the goading riddle of the universe, but the deep moral struggle from which he suffered. After the great renunciation under the Bo tree, and his victorious encounter with temptations, he declared, "I am now going to the city of Benares to establish the kingdom of righteousness, to give light to those enshrouded in darkness, and open the gates of immortality to men. I have completely conquered all evil passions, and am no longer tied to material existence, and I now only live to be the prophet of the perfect truth." The end he has sought, to conquer all evil passions, is now attained. Henceforth he can consecrate himself to his fellow men, and live to show them the way of salvation, which he conceived as absorption in the great cosmic all, made possible by triumph over every evil tendency. Much less than his predecessors did he concern himself about metaphysical queries. His disciples, it is true, obscured the practical end he had in view and the practical means devised to attain it, by developing a system of metaphysical doctrines. The same happened to Christ. The masters were content with dealing in experiential realities. The disciples fed upon theories and abstractions. For Gautama, salvation is the practical psychological reality. It is deliverance from suffering, from the moral suffering due to the thirst leading from birth to birth, thirst for pleasures, for becoming, for power. It is nearly synonymous with Schopenhauer's will to live, and also with the Christian conception of the desires of the natural man, or rather we should say that these various ideas are the outcome of the same experience, of the consciousness that the deepest cause of our suffering is lodged in warring desires, and the perception that the selfish will must be destroyed before happiness can be enjoyed. The life of Gautama expresses powerfully this truth. Pfleiderer, in his Philosophy of Religion, Volume 3, page 65, in commenting on the spirit of Buddhism, has the following remarkable passage: "Nowhere is the elimination of metaphysics from religion, which is so much demanded in our days, in favor of a purely ethical and psychological way of looking at things, carried out to such a degree as in Buddhism. But just on this account it proved a religion without God and without soul, a religion in which religious mystery is contracted to a mere vanishing shadow of a possible outer world. A religion, therefore, which completely lacks motive power both for progressive and deepening knowledge, and for world-conquering action. For only out of the depths of the divine mystery do the never-ceasing streams of living spiritual power issue forth. The streams which spring from the mere surface of experience do not flow to eternal life." We quote these words to make clear, by contrast, the view we are trying to make good in this part of our essay, in example, that the essence of religion in its modern form, in contradistinction to philosophy and metaphysics, is properly the more or less clear consciousness of what Pfleiderer is pleased to call the mere surface of experience, and that the power of religion is proportionally to the depth and intensity of the feelings connected with that experience. The lives of Jesus and of Buddha give a flat denial to the distinguished author of the Philosophy of Religion. The divine mystery is not the craving for metaphysical knowledge. It is the universal and unquenchable thirst for wholeness, for moral harmony. We shall have occasion to observe in the chapter on self-surrender that the only apparent motive power in the deepest religious experiences is the feeling of unrighteousness and the effort towards holiness. It is only when salvation was secured that St. Augustine sought for the how and the why, and elaborated out of what passed in himself the theories concerning total depravity and election. His religious beliefs were the product of ratiocination on his experience of conversion, and not the cause of it. The comparative inferiority of Buddhism to Christianity is not due to its metaphysical bareness, but to the greater weakness of the moral promptings of the Hindu race. The advent of Christ marks a step further in the growth of dual moral consciousness. Psychologically, his influence could be defined on one hand as bringing about a deeper and consequently a more painful differentiation of motives, a deeper cleavage of consciousness into warring parts, and on the other as leading and helping men to a solution of the dualism. We know not through what crisis Christ may have passed previous to his appearing on the scene of the world. Indications of a possible moral turmoil of the same nature as that of Gautama and of other great religious leaders are nevertheless not entirely lacking in the life of Jesus. His baptism by John in the Jordan, and the temptation of 40 days in the wilderness, following hard upon the baptism of repentance, according to the gospel narration, lend themselves easily to such interpretation. Perhaps his affirmation to Nicodemus, who does not understand how a man can be born again of the Spirit: "Verily, verily, I say unto thee, we speak that we do know, and bear witness of that we have seen," John 3:11, should be construed as a reference to his own new birth. At any rate, when he begins his career, he possesses the serene unity for which the founder of Buddhism had had to struggle for years. Christ expresses his inner condition in august words like these: "I and the Father are one." This and like utterances are but the objective formulations of his moral unity and of his sinlessness. His central desire now is to bring men to the Father, that they also may be one with him. Sin has estranged man from the holy God. Hence, reconciliation and establishment of relations of perfect love with the Father presuppose the voluntary abandonment of all wickedness. This sin is regarded as the source of man's misery, and the goal of religious life becomes regeneration, by which unification of motives, in example, union with God, when objectively considered, is achieved. Christ refrained from formulating elaborate doctrines of salvation. He remained close to the empirical facts of regeneration. From practical and empirical, his disciples have made religion speculative and theoretical. Although we may have had as yet neither the good sense nor the courage to return to plain religious empiricism, the first steps in that direction have been taken. The latter creeds of Christendom show a well-marked tendency to revert to the simple formulation of the contents of religious consciousness, and dwell with less and less weight on the metaphysical interpretations given to them by the early church. It is a fact of common observation that our pulpits have almost completely forgotten those articles of the creed which formerly attracted chief attention, and that they are absorbed in preaching regeneration and sanctification. To be religious is no more to conjure and sacrifice, no more to adore, no more to believe in dogmas. It is to live righteously an altruistic life. A conversion unifying the newly born energies of the soul is coming to be the immediate and exclusive end of Christian preaching. And if salvation is still pictured under the form of an objective reconciliation, of a readjustment of relation between man and God, it is nevertheless affirmed with increasing emphasis that the subjective renovation is its essential condition, that the need and the means of regeneration are the motive powers of Christianity is a truism. Christ made the new birth the center of his teaching. Paul experienced and preached it. In the first days of Christianity, sudden conversion seemed to have been the rule, and subjective regeneration continued to be the condition of entrance into the church until formalism displaced more or less completely living faith. Then baptism became, for long dark centuries, not only the symbol but also the substitute for regeneration. Yet the word regeneration was kept, and the church persistently and illogically affirmed that without it, or its symbol, there was no possible salvation. A side current, however, preserved the living doctrine. It is manifest in the ascetic spirit of the saints of the Middle Ages. The experience of many of them reads like the conversions of the revivals of the 18th and 19th centuries. Most, if not all, of the religious reformers of the Renaissance, as also the investigators of religious movements of the last century, see Loyola, Luther, Fox, the Wesleys, Whitefield, Edwards, may be instanced, received their life impulse from a conversion experience which they embodied in the famous motto, "Salvation by Faith." Religious reformations in the Christian church have always been, at bottom, returns to the fact of deliverance from sin, what we have termed a unification of motives, through faith, in example, a return to the biological teachings of Christ and of Buddha concerning the new birth. We know the dominant role which this motive plays in our modern Orthodox churches, particularly in the United States. Footnote: the following facts concerning the influence of revivals may be of interest to our readers. The Rev. Mr. Albert Barnes, in his Sermons on Revivals, New York, 1841, says, "They (revivals) have done more than any other single cause to form the public mind in this country. Society has received some of its most decided directions from these deep and far-pervading revolutions." Page 20. We find the memoirs of the Rev. A. Nettleton, the famous revivalist, edited by B. Tyler. During a period of 4 or 5 years, commencing with 1798 Not less than 150 churches in New England were favored with special effusion of the Holy Spirit, and thousands of souls, in the judgment of charity, were translated from the kingdom of Satan into the kingdom of God's dear Son. Page 13 of 5th edition. In 1829, a circular was sent to the pastors of congregational churches in Connecticut with questions on the usefulness of revivals. It appeared, from the returns, that a large proportion of all who were now members of the congregational churches in this state became such in consequence of revivals; that the most active and devoted Christians are among those who came into the church as fruits of revivals. Very interesting information regarding the opinion of the foremost educational men of the time on revivals and conversions can be gathered from the appendix to Dr. Sprague's Lectures on Revivals of Religion, 2nd edition, 1833. The book itself is meant to be a textbook for revivalists or professional convert makers. The appendix is composed of letters from 10 or more college presidents, including Yale, Brown University, Princeton, Amherst, Williams, and from prominent divines as the Reverend Noah Porter, the Reverend Archibald Alexander, the retired Reverend Chaplain Milvain, Bishop of Ohio. These gentlemen relate the revivals they have witnessed and express their convictions concerning their nature and the most effective methods of conducting them. They are all, in various degrees, in sympathy with revivals. Better than anything else to estimate the role played by conversion in giving direction to individual and national life in this country are the chapters on religious life in the histories of colleges such as Amherst, Yale, Williams, where conversion was looked upon as the normal culmination of Christian education. End of footnote. It is less known that outside the pale orthodoxy, in those confessions of faith which had, in their poverty of religious sense and abundance of intellectualism, more or less dropped the corn with the husk, and whose resulting deadness had become a popular argument against their negations, a revival of the religious spirit is in progress. It manifests itself in a new interest in regeneration and in a growing sense of its meaning and necessity. The book of Edmund H. Sears on conversion, and especially the two essays entitled Regeneration, one by Rev. Thomas R. Slicer, the other by Francis C. Lowell, read before the National Conference of the Unitarian Churches, held at Saratoga Springs, New York, September 1894, are characteristic tokens of the movement we signal. The doctrinal setting is greatly changed, it is evident, but the fact itself is acknowledged as the distinguishing mark of the true Christian. What we are concerned to know is this: does the new birth of which I have spoken give an entrance here and now into the kingdom of heaven, which can be won by no other road? I think it does. Though it seems paradox, I believe that no one can fully know himself as a child of God until he comes to realize how deeply he has sinned. Such an experience, then, it seems to me, is to be desired by every man. That is to say, it is typical of the best, the most nearly perfect religious experience, said Mr. Howland, the address mentioned. The Rev. Thomas Slicer's essay is in the same spirit, and contains nothing that suggests disagreement with the above quoted opinion. We can profitably bring the preceding passage side by side with the following from the great Trinitarian Jonathan Edwards. I am bold to say that the work of God is in the conversion of one soul, considered together with the source, foundation, and purchase of it, and also the benefit, end, and eternal issue of it, is a more glorious work of God than the creation of the whole material universe. End of quote. Unitarians and Calvinists agree on the question of experience, on the essence of religious life. They disagree on the theory, on the metaphysics of conversion. When the division between metaphysics and science has been fully recognized in religion, the Church will take cognizance of facts only, and leave to independent specialists the post-experiential speculations. To sum up, religious consciousness has been gradually clearing itself from the philosophical motive with which it has been associated from the beginning. The religion of primitive man, born of a sense of physical dependence, gradually yields as the sense of sin is realized. To ethical religions, in which man is actuated by a sense of moral dependence, or, to state the same fact in other words, by a feeling of sinfulness, of moral imperfection and weakness. He exclaims with Paul, "For what would I do, that I do not, but what I hate, that I do." This feeling is the religious motive as felt at our stage of development. Religion has become, or is coming to be, the conglomerate of desires and emotions springing from the sense of sin and its release. Silently along with the struggle for existence of individual against individual, another one, purely subjective, often eclipsing the former by its grim relentlessness and tragic seriousness, turns the heart of man at all times into a dueling ground, and sometimes into a hellish tempest. Those who escape least the torments of this dualism are, it seems, the best. The fastidious conscious, as also the callous, the proverbial honest man, find rising from the very centre of their being unquenchable yearnings for the attainment of a moral unity which will bring with it the deep peace and joy which glimpses are obtained in spite of the thousand little compromises in which we wallow. The philosopher pants for what he terms the realization of himself. The Hindu falls in ecstasy before the vision of an abode of rest from the hard conflicts of his sensuous life. The Christian prays for deliverance from sin, pardon, purification, and holiness. The reduction of the dualism thus variously expressed is, in the broadest sense, what we mean by conversion. Anticipating conclusions to be reached in the third part of the essay, we may say that moral dualism and their reductions are the psychic correlates of the establishment of the new physiological functions. Conversion might be defined in the favorite terms of Herbert Spencer as the unification, by coordination, of the parts segregated by differentiation of the homogeneous. Instead of being an abnormal process, conversion, not necessarily the violent type which we have chosen for our analysis, is the very creating method of nature. It represents a physiological as well as a psychic step in the evolution of man. Prejudices and ignorance have had free scope to discredit the value of the class of experiences herein dealt with. That a considerable number of reported conversions were only temporary stimulation to better living, and that some of them were mere pretense, is evident. Concerning the permanency of conversions, the following quotations may be of interest. The Reverend Chas. Hyde, pastor of a church in Ashford, wrote May 1844, "His influence, A. Nettleton's, was permanently good." Concerning the 82 converts who were the fruit of Nettleton's activity in the parish, he writes, "Of the character of these converts I cannot speak particularly, except of those who are now here. 22 have died, 27 have removed from the place, 3 only have been excommunicated. The remainder are, with hardly an exception, now consistent members, some of them pillars in the church." Memoirs of Rev. A. Nettleton, p. 89, 5th edition. In 1832, 11 years after the revival mentioned in the following quotation, the Rev. Dr. Porter declares, "Within about 3 months, I suppose, there were about 250 members who supposed they had passed from death into life. On the first Sabbath in June, 115 were added to the church, and at subsequent periods 120 besides. Of these, a few have since been rejected, and others have declined from their first love. But I have not perceived that a greater proportion of hopeful conversions in this revival than in others, previous and subsequent to it, have proved unsound. Many have died, and many have removed from our immediate connection, but those who remain now constitute the chief strength of the church." From Appendix to Dr. Sprague's Lectures on Revivals of Religion, 2nd edition, 1833. In the testimony and advice of an assembly of pastors of churches in New England at a meeting in Boston, July 7, 1743, signed by 68 ministers and otherwise endorsed by 43 others, 90 of them were from the province of Massachusetts Bay, we read, "Yet of those who were judged hopefully converted and made a public confession of religion, there have been fewer instances of scandal and apostasy than might be expected, so that, as far as we are able to form a judgment, the face of religion has lately changed much for the better in many of our towns and congregations. Similar testimonies could be multiplied at pleasure. The present essay, when complete, will contain 3 parts. Of the 2 parts now published, the first is an analysis of the conversion process. It is divided into 6 subdivisions, corresponding to the natural phases of the experience: the sense of sin, self-surrender, faith, joy, appearance of newness, the role of the will. In Part 2 we place side by side the Christian doctrines concerning justification, faith, the grace of God, the freedom of the will, and the corresponding facts as they appear in Part 1. End of the religious motive. End of Section 1.